Does anybody else find it mildly horrifying that we take another species, lock them up, put machines on their teats, and force them to breastfeed, and then consume the milk that is actually for their young and mass distributed to our species in great quantities and is a staple of our diet? Cow's milk. I still drink cow's milk and I give it to my little one. I'm not vegan, but there is something that horrifies me about it that I can't quite put my finger on. And namely, I think about if we were tied up and held captive by a species that was more intelligent than us or more crafty than us and forced our mothers to breastfeed and fed everyone else except for the species that it was intended for, it would literally, we would be up in arms about this if this were true. But yet there's something about our species and our predisposition to believe that we are at the top of the food chain and that there is nobody above us, and us looking down on our other species that inhabit the earth. And with this tendency of saying to ourselves, I want, I deserve, I have, I take, I can. It reminds me of P. Diddy, actually, and I've been doing a lot of research into his cases, alleged cases, of course. He hasn't been tried for anything. And listening to some of his interviews back in the day, trying to get a sense of his profile and who he is, something struck me as interesting. And that is, he had just lost his job or was in between jobs. I can't remember exactly the details. And he had a child that was born, and he was throwing this major block party. Like, he wasn't just inviting everybody that he knew in his neighborhood to come to his house and party like crazy. And he didn't know what he was going to do. And he was actually, he didn't say it this way, but he was just scared. Like, he didn't know what the future had for him. And somehow, and the detail isn't entirely clear, he met his mentor, Clive Davis, who would go on to bring him up. And Clive Davis is a record executive and has some rumors about him that he may have been responsible for Whitney Houston's death, which was covered up and made to look like it was something else entirely. And there are other whispers about him, but again, these are all just hearsay. Nobody really knows for sure, but he has some questions around him. And the way that P. Diddy talks about this in the interview was how miraculous it was that he somehow serendipitously met the person that would change his life and set up his career to be this amazing feat for him that now, decades later, we would find out would bring so much trauma to people of all ages, allegedly, including minors. And reading some of the lawsuits, it appears as though he was unhinged, if it's true. And to the point that there was no boundary. There's even a story, again, all alleged. There's a story about a friend of his who met him for dinner, and they weren't drinking that night. His friend was a woman, and they were just platonic, as I understand it. But they woke up the next morning in P. Diddy's mansion with the feeling that they had drunk heavily, even though they only had water. And they were in bed with P. Diddy. And the reading in between the lines, they didn't really remember what had happened. And that would be one thing. But the other thing was that they were pregnant. That's why they weren't drinking. Because when you drink or you take things during pregnancy, it can harm the baby. It can actually cause birth defects. It can cause major issues. It can cause the loss of the baby, depending on which trimester you're at. So now imagine going to dinner with a friend. You're the pregnant one. And you're protecting your baby by not drinking. And allegedly somebody takes that choice away from you, puts you and your baby's life at risk for their thrill, for their one evening thrill that to them is probably just going to be a careless memory that they barely even refer back to in their whole library of conquest. But for you, it could be potentially life-changing for your baby, especially. I want, I have, I take, I can, I deserve. And see, when we're operating from different levels of consciousness, the actions and the frequency that we are operating from is very different from when we are awakened. Similar to how many of us don't think twice about drinking cow's milk and giving it to our children. We, in our species, have a tendency of being very myopic and short-sighted. And at certain positions of our maturation and our development, I don't think we understand the weight of our actions, especially when we're unconscious. And what struck me about this story about P. Diddy running into Clive Davis is that magic happens for unevolved people too. Serendipities work for people who are not dedicated to the spiritual awakening journey. Manifestations, if we listen to the rumors, manifestations work very well for a lot of people that don't care about anybody except for themselves. And they don't care about doing what's right for the earth, for the children, for future generations. They only care about the materialistic 3D things. And there are many people that do extremely well materially and materializing. And what is remarkable about this is that the manifestation engine, apparently, you don't have to be spiritual to make it work. You don't have to be in alignment. You don't have to find your purpose, your calling. You don't have to bring in an amazing revolution that's going to change people's lives for the better. You could, in fact, be incredibly greedy and callous and depraved. And apparently, serendipities and the manifestation engine works just as well, if not better, if you sign up and subscribe to lifestyles like that. Allegedly. I was watching an interview of Elon Musk, and he said something interesting. He didn't believe aliens existed because if they did, he would see them. Because Starlink and going up into space and Mars projects and all of this, right? And he is convinced, based on the data that he sees, that they don't exist. because obviously they would have shown up by now on his cameras. And what I find interesting is that we as a species are very data driven, that we believe that the validity of our instruments is so robust that the absence of data means that something doesn't exist. I believe that considering that our sensory system is designed, and I say that word very specifically, designed to detect only a very small fraction of what actually exists out there, I actually believe that it's highly more probable that other intelligent species would not reveal themselves to us unless they wanted to. And that there are known devices and technologies, if you look hard enough, that we as humans have, which allow cloaking from cameras, which allow editing out. You can actually be in front of somebody. With their naked eye, they will not be able to see you with the right equipment. You can shield things from cameras. And so it is this wonderful human bias that we have. This is not unique to Elon Musk. We all have these cognitive biases. Well, if it's not on camera, it doesn't exist, right? If it existed, it would be on camera. I would have seen it by now. And similarly, when we're looking at what's on camera in the Epstein circles and in the P. Diddy circles, we have to ask ourselves, what is really there? Exactly. Well, it's on camera. So what we see is a story. But if you could drink water and wake up the next morning in bed with P. Diddy, no memory of what you did, and you're on camera, then what is actually the story there precisely? What is in front of us is one piece of the story, but when we are intelligent and sentient and wise, we need to be asking other questions, in my personal opinion. I was watching a channeling session of somebody apparently famous. I was not familiar with them, but I'm not surprised. I only recently learned about Bashar, even though Bashar has been channeling through Daryl for decades. It's almost as though I've shifted into a reality where these people exist. They've been here this whole time. I have not. I'm trying to learn my way around. Sometimes I'm still caught in the old worlds, it feels like, but I'm making my way. And this Chiron person, entity, was talking about how they had delivered a message to humanity 35 years prior. And nobody believed the message then, is what they were saying, or very few people did. And it turned out that it was true. And I didn't really delve too deep in trying to figure out what that message was. But this time, what they were saying is that, first of all, it's the end of the world. Yay, most of us knew that. Except it's not. It's not actually the end of the world. It's the end of an era. But for those that only believe in one world and Revelations and Armageddon, then apparently it will be the end of the world for them. And perhaps not. Perhaps it'll be like Y2K. It depends on your perspective. But this period of time apparently has been mapped out for eons. The Mayans have mapped it out. Other cultures have mapped it out. Astronomers have mapped it out. Astrologers have mapped it out. And what Cryon was saying is that everything that is unfolding is known. This to me resonates as truth because not only in my mystical experiences have I heard literally this, everything is known. Everything is known. Literally. And also, I have this intuitive feeling that out of all the timelines, whatever is happening not only is known, but is optimized. So we're on the optimal path. And no matter what it looks like, and sometimes it might look kind of grim, it's actually leading to the right place. That's how I feel. You might not feel that way, and that's okay. We might be on different timelines, but that's how I feel. That's how I feel peace. And when I look at what's happening, I'm like, well, I don't fully understand it, but I can deeply feel that I'm in the right place and I'm going the right way. And what Praiwan was saying is that this World War III, which was started by Israel, was predicted. And the feud, the conflict in Israel, sort of like, I think he described it like the spark. This is the last. It's kind of ominous, right? This is the last because it moves us into a new frequency. And this frequency change and shift has been forecasted and foretold for many, many years preceding. Now, let's reconcile this a little bit. Because when we look at some of the subcultures and the fear narratives that are going around, what we hear is that the world is being run by a group of powerful people, entities, human, not human. It's not really clear. And they're leading us to doomsday. And their main objective is oppression. Kind of like P. Diddley getting his diddles off. They just are singularly focused on suffering and misery of everybody. And now we understand that the manifestation engine works for people like that. And it appears that they've manifested on top of those that want a different type of existence. This whole dark versus light arrangement. Now, if everything has been forecasted and predicted, and we are perfectly aligned, what's really going on here? Is the universe benevolent? Is it neutral? Is it malevolent? Is it something else? So this Chiron character was talking about how 9/11 was a big surge in consciousness and a rise in frequency. And I thought this was really interesting because I've separately looked into the papers about the random number generators, which apparently were going crazy. They're normally just randomly popping off. I forget however many, there's several of them scattered across the entire globe. And they're just happily like, just randomly, but there is no structure to the data. It's just noise. And somehow, with an event like 9/11, they start acting strange. Not only strange, they all independently start clicking together. It's not exactly precisely like that, but the data shows that it's not just random noise. There's actually structure to the data, and the structure is correlated between all of the little devices. And what I find interesting in these studies, and a lot of people disagree with it, and this is okay. It's a mystery, right? How does this happen? Why does it happen? There are many great minds that are discussing that, or at least they were. What I find interesting is that the hours preceding 9/11. It was 3 to 4 hours. That's when the random number generators all around the world started their coherence. It wasn't the moment of, it wasn't when everybody was watching TV, right? The whole idea behind it is that the random number generators were affected by mass consciousness because it shows separately, other people have done these studies, that a group of meditators can actually, with their intent and meditation, make the random number generators not random. So conscious intent can affect them. So the whole unifying theory behind it, hypothesis, has been, okay, well, we've collectively been observing this event, collectively have been feeling it, and our consciousness is coordinating with the electromagnetic field of the earth, and somehow that is affecting, like there are questions about the technicalities behind it. It's unsolved as far as I know. But to me, if the random number generators were doing this 3 to 4 hours prior to the event, before anybody really knew about it except for those bad actors, that suggests that there's something else going on. I believe that what Crywon was saying is that events like that create mass consciousness shifts. It has the effect of awakening people. And separately and intuitively, I feel that the reason that the random number generators were starting to not be random before that event happened is because it was a fated event. It was known. It was orchestrated. And indeed, just like P. Diddy meeting Clive Davis, magic happened because it was facilitating a destiny that would end up bringing in incredible amounts of trauma and abuse and oppression. What gives? If the final outcome is actually higher consciousness and awakening, could it be, just like individuals having a dark night of the soul, could it be that these coordinations of, quote, evil are actually benevolence, helping to shake us out of our sleepy complacency, our unconsciousness? I can personally attest that before I had my dark night of the soul, I was so asleep. I don't think anything was going to shake me out except for something like a dark night of the soul. And what I experienced was incredibly traumatic for me at that time. Very hard. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but it was also effective. And the speed in which I awakened was so crazy fast. It was a miracle considering where I started, looking back. Again, I'm not condoning evil. I'm not condoning P. Diddy. I'm not condoning the allegations. I'm not condoning any of this. But thinking about it from a holistic point of view, if you had children that were unconscious, that were not thinking about how they were impacting other species or their planet or even other people, and were in I want, I take, I victimizing modalities, the best way to awaken them is to show them in great detail their shadow and other people's shadow so they learn from them, and to experience being at the hands of somebody's horrific shadow. So not only do they have wisdom, but it scares them straight into a more evolved version of themselves. Could it be that, in fact, everything, like Crywon was saying, is known, is mapped out, like on a highway, and we're in the vehicle kind of freaking out because we don't understand how everything works. We just understand that there's a lot of pain and suffering and we don't like it. And that's how we understand how we create pain and suffering. It is actually a learning tool for us to see it so we understand how we are doing it, because there's this, I'm telling you, there's this craziness with human psychology where we somehow don't see ourselves and how we are bringing trauma to other people and how we experience it. It's really profound. People in my client work, especially, come to me often because they're in pain because of what other people are doing to them. And by the time that we really get into it, they start to understand how they're doing it too. And how, in some cases, not all the cases, the people that are acting in those ways towards them are often acting because they were trying to protect themselves first. They're responding. They're actually responding. But when people are in their shadow, they don't understand that. They don't understand the chain of events. All we seem to understand is somebody's hurting me. I need them to change. Or somebody's hurting me and I know I'm hurting them too, but I don't fully understand how. It's like we are blind. We're blind to the suffering of cows. We're blind to the suffering of plants. I still haven't figured out how to solve that in a conscious, ethical society where we have to eat each other. The plants are conscious. They feel pain. And so vegans, you're not better. I'm not better either. Carnivores aren't better either. There's nobody better here. We're all delivering suffering, saying, well, we're not delivering as much suffering. No, it's still, you see what I mean? Anyway, darkness is the vehicle to light. And light is the vehicle to darkness. And I believe that they're both headed to the same place, helping us to transcend what all of this actually means. Because if it's divine coordination and we are on the road to transcendence and ascension, and everything is in the right order, the right place, we're exactly on schedule, on target, that means the people that are running amok are not running amok. You see what I mean? It means that we are literally on schedule and on target.